interesting because I'm trying, wait, hold on, I gotta put my phone on here. Because I was just about to go live, and right when I was setting up to go live, I got a text. And I was like, oh, let me just check my text real quick to see what it's about. And it was actually a really hard text. Like, I feel like I'm kind of like on the edge of tears right now. But it's interesting because I had already planned that I was going to talk about why I make meaning out of suffering. And oh my God, I feel like I'm going to start crying. I'm going to try not to, though, because I don't need to. I feel so like off kilter from getting some hard news. Let me take a deep breath. This is exactly why I make meaning out of suffering. But I've been thinking about this for a few days. This whole idea of making meaning out of suffering. And should we not? Do you not? I would love to hear off jump if somebody's watching this and you're just like, do I or do I not? Or do you tend not to? But I've been in the process of kind of like externally processing with a friend why I make meaning out of suffering. And I was like, well, maybe that's if I'm going to be live, maybe that's a helpful thing for me to talk about on here. So I started thinking about making meaning out of suffering, I think pretty young. I think that is one of the things that can be a good thing if you're when kids go through trauma and they start really thinking about why am I here? You know, usually kids who deal with excessive trauma are starting to think about, you know, why am I here? Should I be here? I definitely had times in high school when I was suicidal. And my mom had raised me in the church, in a Christian church. So I had some some beliefs about like, well, God doesn't want me to kill myself, you know, but it did still beg the question, like, why am I here? But honestly, the first time I started really thinking about this is when I went to seminary in the year 2009. It was a while ago, y'all. Actually, 2007 is when I started seminary. And I had a class about the problem of pain. Is it the problem of pain? Yeah, the problem of pain. The question of how can there be a good God in the face of evil? Because, you know, one of the core tenets of Christianity, I mean, actually, even one of the core tenets of Islam, I believe, is the belief that there is a good God, an almighty God who is good. And how can we reconcile that with the problem of pain? Especially when you have major world events like the genocide of Native Americans or the slavery of Africans. But even before that, in biblical times, you know, the Hebrews were a slave, were slaves for, you know, 400 years or however long they were slaves for. Anyway, so that was when I first started thinking about the problem of pain and the fact that suffering and trauma is a universal human experience. Sorry, I'm still feeling kind of jarred from that text message. But I do know what I'm saying because I just literally said all of this to a friend in the last 24 hours. So that started forming some worldview beliefs for me about like the idea of what is the meaning of it, what is the meaning of, and is there meaning when things like genocide happen? Like, it's not just an individual, you know, suffering is not just an individual thing. Should we try to make meaning out of big, giant global events, catastrophes, you know, earthquakes that take out, you know, hundreds of thousands of people? But trauma in general, should we try to make meaning from it? So one of the first times that I started thinking about this was in that context. And I felt like, yes, of course, we have to make meaning out of it. And I don't subscribe to like this kind of like toxic positivity, like, oh, well, I'm so glad that Africans were brought here as slaves because now there's African Americans. I'm not saying that. I don't think about it like that. But I do think about it like, what is the redemption of the fact that these things have happened? Is there anything redeeming about it whatsoever? Should we ask those questions? But what I think is that we need to stop in any situation, especially individual trauma, that we need to stop and assess our own personal, the impact that's happened to us personally. Hold on. Let me just finish doing that. For some reason, I can't do this and that at the same time. And sit in it. So I firmly believe, the first thing I believe about this is that we do have to learn to sit in suffering and be like, that was a bad thing, especially personal trauma. Like, I endured a personal trauma. Like, for example, this is what I was talking about with my friend, and I talk about a lot here in the channel, was the abuse I endured from my dad. So there is a time for me to just sit in that. Like, wow, I endured, where is my, oh, here it is. I endured trauma from my father. And I don't think I should just be like, okay, well, what's the redeeming thing? I don't think we should jump from a really traumatic personal trauma to like, how do we redeem this? How do we make meaning? I think we need to sit in suffering. I mean, we all know at this point, I feel like it's pretty widely known that you have to let yourself grieve in order to heal. That's part of it. So I do think that just sitting in the grief is part of it. Is part of making meaning, is just knowing like I'm a human who's actually worthy of the time and space needed to heal. That's actually one of the sad parts of capitalism and the way our society is set up, is that people go through trauma and don't even have time to stop and like do the proper amount of suffering. Like, there's other cultures who do this so much better. Like, even I think Jews, I'm pretty sure that Jews have like a period. I don't know anything about Jewish culture, but don't Jews have like a long period of time after someone dies or something where they just have to sit around and grieve, and like they have to wear black for like a certain amount of time? But yeah, this culture, our society is really not set up to like give people the time to grieve, you know, or even have babies. We don't even give our bodies enough time to recover. But yeah, so I just want you to know, I'm not saying we should blow past the, you know, the recognition that something hard has happened to us. You know, like if I think about like my own childhood after my dad went to prison, my mom took me to therapy. But I wonder what it would look like if I had been given the time and space to heal from that, as opposed to just like, okay, time to go back to school, time to like act like nothing happened, time to pretend like this didn't completely alter your life completely. Like reporting that I was being assaulted, going to court, watching my dad be taken off in handcuffs, having him sentenced to prison, and then me literally just going back to normal life at 10 or 11 years old, acting like I did not just endure a tremendous trauma, like a decade-long trauma culminating in the imprisonment of my father. You know what I mean? Like, I just look back and I wonder, what would it have looked like to go through a proper grieving process with that? You know, I'm talking about beyond talk therapy, but that's just a good example of like how the way our society is set up, we don't give people the time and space to grieve, or even really have patience for people grieving, whatever it might be, whether it's a divorce, whether it's having a baby, anything. So anyway, so yeah, so I'm not saying like to make meaning out of suffering, we should rush to the redemption. I do think we need to sit in grief. We need to let our grief marinate. We need to also acknowledge that grief is not linear. It's really all over the place. You can have some good days, and then some days, a year could go by and something will take you out. But what me and my friend were talking about in particular was a broken relationship that I had, and how I have both healed and felt hurt from that relationship, and the complexity of that. But anyway, so I think the first step is in making meaning of suffering is actually acknowledging that you're a human who needs to rest, who needs to grieve, who went through something life altering, and sitting your ass down and just being like, this hurt me, this harmed me. A way to honor my dignity is to let myself cry, let myself sleep extra if I need to, give myself space and time to move, and to grieve, I'm sorry. And I feel sad that we live in a society that doesn't do that. You know what another example of this is last year after I endured an assault, I went back to work, like, I think, like, let's say it happened on a Tuesday. I went back to work on Thursday. I was working full time as a supervisor at that point. And then, you know, it was a physical assault, and I felt okay. I was really, really, really sore. My jaw was really sore. I had bruises. I had like 5 or 6 bruises. My neck was really hurting. But like I could sit at a desk, you know, which is what a major part of my job is. But anyway, but like that weekend, I broke down. Like I had a full on emotional breakdown. Like what the hell just happened to me? And then I told them like, I'm not okay. I can't, I need a week off. Like I need to recover. Like that was some crazy shit that just happened. I had never in my life been assaulted like that. I had never been beat up. I had never been in a fight in my life, y'all. I had never took a punch. Well, except for that one time. There was one time when I was a little kid, a little boy punched me in the nose. One time in 6th grade, this little girl punched me in the stomach. And one time in high school, my mom punched me in my arm, which I just talked about in my last live, which was funny. It was actually funny and not traumatic. And I was way too old, so it just didn't hit me, you know, in any significant way. But my point is, y'all, my point is that, I feel like my eyes is looking crazy. They don't look bad from this angle, but they look bad from what y'all can see. I probably shouldn't have went with orange. You know what? This actually has yellow. I never use yellow. I'm going to try. Let's try some yellow. So anyway, it was jarring as hell. It was so jarring, y'all. I was like, what just happened to me? I have never put yellow on my eyes in my life, y'all. But I got this yellow ass sundress on, so you can't see it. Well, I don't know if you can. Let's just try. Let's just be bold. All I'm doing today after I get ready here is I'm going to a coffee shop for 3 hours to work on school stuff and YouTube stuff and just my life stuff. But I really just wanted to put myself together a little bit because I'm on my big P. I have a visit from Aunt Flo, and sometimes, you know, it feels better to look better. I feel like that just gave it like a weird, whatever. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. But anyway, looks like my eyes are going through a sunset. Anyway, so what I was saying was, it was jarring, and I asked for a week off, and I actually didn't have the time. And I said, I need y'all to make the time. I literally cannot physically work for a week because I need to heal. Physically, mentally, emotionally, like I'm not okay. So I do think the first step in making meaning from suffering is giving yourself the time and the space to recognize that human beings need to rest and think and grieve and cry in order to heal. But in terms of why I decided, so my faith is part of it. There's two things. It's my faith and it's science. Those are the two reasons why I make meaning of suffering. Faith and science. And also for me, it just fits my personality. But in terms of science, I think I started learning about, first of all, I follow Dr. Joe Dispenza. I don't know if y'all know who Dr. Joe Dispenza is. I would highly recommend, if you don't follow him, to follow him here on YouTube. You know, he's got a website, he's got a newsletter, he's got all kinds of stuff. He's pretty well known, but he has like a super fascinating story. He was in a really, really bad car. Well, no, bike. Actually, he was on a bike and a semi-truck hit him, y'all. An 18-wheel semi-truck hit him. He was in a bad way. The doctors told him he would never, he was a chiropractor before then. The doctors told him he would never walk again. I know you're like, how does this connect? I'll tell you. I'm getting there. So he saw the best doctors in the world because he was a chiropractor. So he knew something about backs already because his back and all that was damaged. His spinal cord, whatever is in the back there, the long one. I know nothing. I read this from his book, by the way, I think it's called You Are the Placebo, or The Placebo. I forgot what it's called. It has the word placebo in it, but it's a great book. That's the book that really put me in a different mindset. But anyway, so he went and saw the best doctors in the world. They all said the same thing, like, sorry, you're never going to walk again. You need this surgery, this certain surgery. Once you get this surgery, kind of the deal is sealed. You'll never walk. And he was like, I'm not getting that surgery. He just didn't want it. He believed there was a way. So he started the process of how to use the power of the mind, the power of positive thinking, and the power of placebo to heal himself. And he, within a year, like walked out of the hospital. He told them, I'm going to walk out of here within a year. And he did. Like literally by the end of the year, they rolled him out to the front of the hospital. And then he stood up. And so then that led him to start studying the brain and how the brain works and the science behind the science of healing, which led him to study the causes of what trauma does on the brain, like how suffering impacts the brain and how we can use the brain to heal the body. It sounds confusing, but it's so fascinating to me. But when I read that book, You Are the Placebo, I had already been super interested in the science of the brain and trauma, in part because of what I've been through. Like the more you start learning how to heal from trauma, especially if something in particular has really gripped you, you know, it just became really fascinating for me. So I'd already been really interested in learning about that. But then once I found him, I'm like, it's really like going deep on this. And then I started doing some of his practices, and it's not woo-woo, y'all. Like he's coming from a scientific perspective, because I just recently read his book. Well, I listened to it on Audible, the Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, but it's basically a book about like how to rewire your brain to break patterns, to break addictions, to heal yourself from certain things. And so when I read that book, I started doing it because at the time I had no left arm mobility. Like I couldn't do this, what I'm doing right now. And I couldn't go like this to take my bra off. And I just couldn't do anything with my left arm. And I actually went to the hospital a few times, especially one day. It was like in so much pain. I couldn't even do what I'm doing right now. And they were just like, there is no explanation. Like, we have no idea what's going on with your arm. There's no explanation. Like, the doctor told me just to go home and rest. And I was like, just so you know, it's been a year. I was like, it's been a year of, I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't take a bra off. I'm like, I'm just now experiencing so much pain that it's actually limiting, you know, my life. Like, my life is impacted. So I'm not just coming to the ER for shits and giggles. Like, this is a problem. Anyway. So once I read Dr. Joe Dispenza's book, I started doing that and applying it to my arm thing. And it went away, y'all. It just went away. Obviously, you can see I can do this. It just went away. Like within a week, it worked. Stuff worked. I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. And it was science-based. It was not sit in your room like this, you know, and just think good thoughts. Oh, my arm's going to feel better. Like it was science-based activities of how to literally rewire your brain. So he talks so much about that. And I started thinking like, you know, he talks about individual trauma too. And I'm like, well, if we can, you know, we can use this stuff to deal with our physical suffering, because he talks about emotional suffering too. You know, certainly there's a way to make meaning out of what we've been through physically, or I'm sorry, mentally as well. How to heal from that and how to figure out how to feel better from that. And I started trying to use it to heal myself from complex PTSD, which is a very well-known condition, mental illness condition that is developed if you are suffering and enduring complex trauma over time, particularly for children. But it is very much recognized as an understandable and kind of like a foregone conclusion. If you're in a domestic violence situation, you're probably going to develop complex PTSD. So, and I definitely developed complex PTSD as a result of my marriage or my ex, my life with my abusive ex. So yeah, so I started trying to put towards the like what Dr. Joe Dispenza says about complex PTSD and making meaning out of what I had been through, and using that as a way to heal myself. And it became something that oh my gosh. I need a different, I'll fix this. I realize I look like such a weirdo. But anyway, so I started using the principles, and I started feeling like I was healing. And I was like, oh my gosh, this really, really works. So that's not like making meaning out of suffering, but I could see that it was doing something in me. And so then I started studying more stuff about this whole idea of like how to heal from really complex trauma, because narcissistic abuse is really a complex trauma. I read the book Plan B by Sheryl Sandberg. Sheryl Sandberg's book talks a lot about making meaning out of suffering, which I thought was so beautiful and so helpful. I really, really loved her book, which, by the way, if you ever lost a spouse unexpectedly, lost a child, or had some sort of like sudden trauma, I really, really recommend her book. It's really, it's just really comforting. It's like a comfort. Yeah, it's just very comforting the way she does it. Some books about grief can feel really abrasive, but I got so much out of that book. Like, very few books about grief I finish all the way through because it might get a little too heady, but she just does such a beautiful job. So anyway, and then she also has a Facebook group called I think it's called Plan B. I'm pretty sure it's called Plan B. But anyway, so she talks a lot too about the importance of making meaning out of suffering. And especially as it pertains to helping other people. But I was like, this is intuitive. I mean, I don't know. Let me know if you feel this way, but it feels, I'm late, but I'm here. Hey, it feels really intuitive to me to do that. Like, I don't know, when I was younger, like one of my core key memories when I was like 16 years old was, I had a boyfriend who pushed me down in the driveway, and like, you know, on the concrete driveway, he just pushed me, and I was like literally kneeling on the ground. He had never done anything like that before. And I was kind of in shock, but I also thought to myself, if I ever get out of this situation with him, I'm going to help other women who have survived the kind of things that I've experienced. Because by that time in my life, I had already survived a sexually abusive father, a verbally and physically abusive brother, poverty, a mother with mental illness, and sexual assault in my teen years. So I had already had a sense, like, I've been through a lot already, and I'm 16 years old. So I want to help other women who've been through similar things. It just was intuitive to me. But I guess, from what I understand, it's not intuitive leap for everybody. So, I mean, I don't know. I thank God that I'm who I am. I thank God that I thought like that at 16. But I'm glad I did. And so what science is telling us, what psychologists and psychiatrists are telling us, is that one of the ways, not the best way, but one of the ways to heal from tremendous individual suffering is to make meaning of it, to find the redemption. So that is the first part for me, is the science piece. The second part is the faith part, because I do firmly believe, as a liberal, Jesus following feminist Christian, that God does make all things new. That is my belief, that God renews and makes all things new, and that there isn't an end of the story here, you know, that there's things happening in another realm that I don't understand and won't ever understand, and it really isn't mine to understand. And that the personal individual suffering that I have suffered has some meaning. It has some reason and some meaning. And in some ways, people could be like, oh, that's just blind faith and that's stupid. It is blind faith. It is faith. It is that. That's just what it is. And that's how I've chosen to live my life. And so I live my life like that. You know, that's my beliefs. And I know that not everybody is willing to you know, take that leap. But I would ask, and I would continue to ask, what is the alternative? Actually, I don't want to put this on now. What is the alternative? What is the alternative? You know, I could look at what's happened to me in terms of like my childhood trauma, and I could lay on the floor and feel sorry for myself all day long. That's the alternative, you know? So I think the alternative for me is, this happened, you know, and what can I do now to help other people, to help other women, to help other child survivors of other adult survivors of severe childhood sexual trauma, you know? What can I do to continue to become a better person? What can I model to my kids, you know? How can I find purpose in what happened to me, and how I live my life now, and who I choose to be, and how I choose to treat my own children. So I found meaning in that. And then I realized that that's pretty much backed by my faith and by science, that decide, even just the decision to turn around something that's bad that's happened to you, whether it was your fault or not, or whether or not it was done to you or something that happened to you, you know, like random things, like let's say the earth opens up and your spouse fell into a earth hole right next to you, and it just happened, you know, it wasn't his fault, it wasn't your fault, he just randomly died in front of you, or let's just say caught a bullet. I'm just trying to think of something that's kind of random. um it really doesn't matter what the trauma is. We all know as humans, we're all going to suffer in some way. We're going to suffer, a lot of us, a tremendous amount just from being alive. And a lot of faith and science backs that it is absolutely healthy for us to think, this happened to me. I have radical acceptance. This has happened to me. How can I survive these traumas that have happened to me? How can I become a better person as a result of this or that, or these complex traumas or individual single event traumas? And how can I give meaning to it and help other people? It is literally a fundamental part, I think, of being a human, but I think of being a good human. It's the reason why people don't have tolerance for people who, you know, what they call self-loathing, or people who sit around and are like, woe is me, woe is me, woe is me, because we want, as humans, we want to see other people make meaning of their suffering. You know, not only is it a good way to go about life, not only is it a path towards healing, but people don't have a lot of tolerance for you if, when you're in that I feel sorry for myself place. And I'm not saying there's not a place for that. I do think there's a place for I feel sorry for myself. Like I said earlier, there's a place to feel sorry for yourself, to feel sad, to recognize your suffering. And then there's a place to say, okay, this happened. It was so sad and so awful. Now what? Now what? Now what? You know? But what I think, what I want to be careful is to say is that you still have value and worth if you're not in a place to do that yet. Or maybe even ever, because not everybody can or will recover from what they've been through. But I do think that it's a healthy place to start. Not in all circumstances, but in a lot of circumstances. Because I just think that too many people in the world have gone through way too much suffering. Oh, this is weird. Okay. So I had like an eyelash that was like going into my eyeball. It was so weird. Yeah, it's just too many people, too many humans have gone through too much and too much suffering to just be like, okay, well, we're just gonna be like, oh, there's a problem of pain, and not do anything about it. I really hate that there's a black line right there. I really want to wash it off now. Anyway, so yeah, I'm curious if anybody else has really thought about this, or tried to, try to make meaning from your suffering. I think for me, it's just, it's not something I don't want to go through more suffering to learn more lessons, but I can definitely say the things I have been through. What I was telling my friend was that what I feel like is literally the best part of who I am. Like what I love about myself the most. If somebody said, what do you love about yourself? What is the first thing you would say? I would say that I'm kind, that I'm compassionate, that I care for people who are vulnerable. And, you know, usually that's poor, impoverished, but emotionally poor. That I have a lot of empathy. And all of that is literally a direct result of growing up in poverty with an abusive father, a mentally ill mother, an abusive brother. Like all of those things shaped me. So yeah, I could have learned those lessons other ways. Yeah, life could have been different for me, because I'm definitely have suffered from having multiple traumas to then marrying an abuser who like destroyed me in a lot of ways until I could rebuild. But all of that, who I am and who I love about myself now, I don't think I could have got any other way. I really don't, than going through what I went through. So I'm not saying like, yay, I'm so glad I went through so many traumas. I'm just saying those traumas happen, and as a result, I'm thankful that I've become who I've become, and I know that that's not the case for everybody. Um, I know that not everyone survives the trauma that they've went through, so I feel very privileged and incredibly blessed that I have, but, I don't know, this is just my encouragement to you to not give up on your healing journey if you've been through a lot of trauma and it just doesn't make sense. I would say don't force it to make sense and heal, but at some point, practice radical acceptance and think, even with this nonsensical ass trauma I went through, what can I do now to help other people who may have also went through a nonsensical, ridiculous trauma that just didn't have to have happen. So anyway, thank you for coming to my Get Ready with me today, and I'll be back tomorrow. Bye, y'all.